It's a chance for a conversation around certain two projects today, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion that Helena will share. So cameras off if you wouldn't like to be recorded, and I will now hand over to Annabelle and Véronique, who are in conversation around a project at the Museum of the Home. So, and they'll introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. Thank you very much, Fran. And thank you to Helena, Fran and Stephen for organising these events. It's great to be part of this conversation. My name is Annabelle Wilkins. I'm a postdoctoral researcher currently working on two projects. One is the Making at Home project based at Kingston, funded by Nordforsk, and I'm working with Fran and others on that project. And the project I'm going to be talking about today is based at Queen Mary University of London in collaboration with several other partners called the Stay Home Stories project. And that's working in collaboration with the Museum of the Home and focusing on the Stay Home digital collection, which is what we'll be talking about today. Véronique, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Annabelle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Véronique, and I'm a collections assistant at the Museum of the Home. And what I do is I'm thinking about, or rather what I do is look at different ways of creating relationships with our object and book collections. And one of the collections I'm work on specifically is the Stay Home digital collection. So that's what we'll be talking about today.
That's great. Thank you, Véronique. So just to say a few words of introduction about the project as a whole that we're both working on and involved in. It's called the Stay Home Stories project. It looks at how people's experiences of home have been impacted by COVID-19. And it's funded by the UKRI and AHRC, a rapid response to COVID-19. And the partners are listed at the bottom of that slide. It involves Queen Mary, University of Liverpool, Museum of the Home, National Museums Liverpool, the Royal Geographical Society, and the Arts Centre for Studies of Home, which is based at Queen Mary and the Museum of the Home. And there's lots more you can find out about the project on our website and Twitter account. So please do explore the different features there. And there are three main strands to the project. So the first strand, documenting home, and this is where we look at co-curating material that's been received by the museum that we'll talk further about shortly, curating this material for display and deposit at the museum, and various forms of engagement with that material. And as part of that, I've also been looking at political and media coverage of how home has been represented, so in newspapers, in political speeches and debates. So there's several different kind of areas of focus within that. And then the second strand is around how people's everyday experiences of home have been affected. So we've been doing interviews with people in London and Liverpool, working with community researchers on those interviews. They've been conducting their own interviews as well about their experiences over the past couple of years. And then the third strand is called Mapping Home, and that's working with children and young people who've been doing their own maps of their home spaces and experiences. And there's an example of one of those featured on this slide. So that's a kind of broad overview of the whole project. And so just to get into the discussion about the Stay Home collection specifically, so I wanted to start, Véronique, I'll just invite you to talk about how the museum started collecting material during the pandemic and why it was decided to start exploring this collection, and how you went about reaching out to people to invite them to submit material. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle, for starting. So the Stay Home digital collection. So it's a rapid response collecting project that was launched in April of 2020. So in the wake of the sort of the announcements of the first national lockdown in the UK. And so what I mean by rapid response collecting, it means that the method of collecting is collecting in the moment. So it's documenting something as it's happening. And so what we did at the museum is that we launched an online questionnaire that is accessible through the museum's website, and that you can sort of see how it was set up, in which people were encouraged.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't see anything except your faces. The PDF is just on the right-hand bottom of the screen, and there's no slides visible to me. I don't know if that's the same for everyone.
Oh, okay. I thought that it was sharing the slides. Can you see them, Helena? You're muted, Helena.
Yes, I can see them.
Oh, wait, I don't know whether some people can and some people can't, depending on their like status on Teams or something.
Oh,
could people say generally, okay, other people can see them? I think I've just posted in the chat that it's, if you click on an option of more and then focus on content, then you, okay, so some people can't see. Okay, some people can't see. Okay, maybe if we try going out of this kind of share mode, and then, or I could try unspotlighting you as well.
no, that just shows Annabelle full screen. Ah, yes, done it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And I can send the slides afterwards if anybody would like to, if that's okay with you, Veronique. Great.
Yes, that's fine. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If it's okay, I'll continue now. So, as I was saying, the project was launched in April of 2020 to sort of pick up on how the lockdown and the sort of stay-at-home mandate was was changing people's experiences of home and homemaking. And so again, people were encouraged to share their experiences through this online questionnaire that is still accessible through the museum website, and were encouraged to respond to a set of prompts, which had folks describe their home, their relationship to their neighbors, if some of the routines in the household had been changed, if the relationships had been changed. And participants could share through writing, through voice recordings, or through images as well. So we ended up having a range of sort of like digital material shared by different participants. And again, the aims and objectives were to sort of not only understand make sense of what was happening, so people were making sense of how the pandemic was affecting them, but from the perspectives of the museum, finding new ways, new interactive and creative ways of building collections, centering people in their collections, and encouraging different forms of documentation to sort of be highlighted in the process. So yeah, that's sort of what I'll say in terms of the project. I think I'm going to talk about the responses, as I don't know if the slides.
Yeah, and if you could just say a bit about the overall response in terms of like numbers of submissions and how the project was received, sort of generally, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes. So again, it started in April 2020, and since then we've received about 500 submissions. Again, all sort of submitted to different people were able to share what they'd like, but then over like about 500 people shared their stories. And I mean, it's funny because the museum initially didn't think it received such a wide response, but it did. And so we had people from across the UK share. We also had people overseas share some of their experiences. particularly in Australia and India. And within that, we received just a range of sort of experiences, ranging from the type of housing people were living in, sort of the different sort of routines and rituals they had built over their around their home, and also in terms of the people that were submitting to from a range of ages, and sort of like professional backgrounds, and again, different sort of home structures too. So yeah, quite a wide response, and yeah, it's quite a generative resource that we have, because again, people were more than willing to share their experiences and respond to the prompts.
Thanks, Veronique. Thank you. So for the next few slides, I'm just going to focus on a few of the stories that people shared, just to bring this discussion to life a bit more. And I think it's really important to feature some of the people's stories and experiences, and that gives you more of an idea of what's featured within the collection. So this first story is from Mrs. B. And she says, "We love our home, it's our safe place, but we realise it's the people in it that are far more important. My son is severely autistic. He has taken some time to adjust. Our home is now his classroom. He has learnt to bake, to clean, and to develop lots of life skills. He would run and hide from the vacuum and the electric mixer because of the noise. It caused us so many problems. But now, part of his new routine, he bakes cupcakes every day and he helps me vacuum, both massive positives to come out of the pandemic." And I think these kinds of experiences, they've really been reflected in some of the follow-up interviews and the interviews that we've done as part of the Stay Home Stories project, just people talking about the routines that they developed, how they supported each other, some of the positive opportunities that came out of spending more time at home, as well as the huge challenges that people faced over that lockdown period. The next story is from Maisie, who's a university student. She says, "At the moment I'm at university in Winchester. I decided to go back to my student house after Christmas because I love the city and feel so at home here." And she says, "We live on a quiet residential road. It's a popular student area, so I often see students out and about. I spend most of the time in my room where I eat, study, exercise, read and watch TV." And this one I think is particularly interesting in relation to the other interviews that we've done with students on the project, because most of them were talking about how they moved back to their family home rather than staying in their student accommodation, because for many of them, they just didn't want to be perhaps the only one staying in the student house. They felt the need to go back to their family. So I think it's really good that we've got a range of perspectives on what students were, where they were living, what they were doing throughout the lockdown period as well. The next one is from Chantal, and she says, "I've rediscovered my talents. My front room looks like an art gallery. It's made me realise how much my confidence has grown over the years looking at my work. I painted a wall mural, which was a big risk, but it happened and I'm proud of it." So this, I think, is a really good example of some of the kind of skills and activities that people were doing during lockdown. So for Chantal, it was really an opportunity to kind of rediscover those interests and talents again. And there's lots of examples of people using their home in such a kind of multifunctional way throughout the collection as well, and sort of enjoying those aspects that the lockdown brought. I think it's also really important to highlight the challenges and difficulties that people face, particularly in many cases for people living alone, although isolation was also found amongst people who lived in shared or communal housing, particularly if they were in overcrowded housing. That could often be really difficult, but I think often for people living alone, it could be a struggle. And this person, Christine, describes how she's single and has no close family. And normally she would do a lot of volunteering, but all that has had to come to a stop because of her age and the risks from COVID. And she talks about this being very detrimental to her well-being and how much she misses being with people. And this was a really recurrent theme amongst people of different ages, actually, different ages and different backgrounds. But yeah, I think this is a really strongly emerging theme, just how people were struggling to cope with that isolation at times. And then the story here from Claire talks about her relationship with her neighbours and how much this had changed. So she had previously had a difficult relationship with some neighbours, and she describes this remarkable change that's come over one neighbour who previously organised a police raid on her house. But then during the 8 p.m. clapping for the NHS session, she says, he talked to me quite normally as if the past 18 years had never occurred. I was speechless, surprised, as if the past between us never happened. Last week, he even waved to me as he drove past. It now feels like my village is a good place to live. And this was, again, a really strong theme across the collection and across the interviews, just how people often felt that they'd got to know their neighbours more, they'd built relationships and had that stronger sense of community during the pandemic and these kind of events that brought people together in a way. So those are just a few of the many stories that have been shared. And in the next section, I wanted to ask Véronique if you could say a bit more about how the museum has ensured that the stories of different populations or different groups are being represented, and maybe if there are any gaps or any ways in which the museum and the project has tried to ensure that, yeah, the different stories are being heard and amplified in this way.
Of course, thank you, Annabelle. So I was saying the overall response was quite successful, but what I will say is that the Stay Home digital collection is not a totality, meaning that it's there's some things that are not necessarily represented in the stories shared. One thing that comes to mind right now is, for example, people that couldn't necessarily be at home, couldn't because of being a key worker, for example, having to work during the pandemic and not being able to work from home. So those stories are less represented in the Stay Home collection. Some people have speak on, for example, a family member or a relative working at the NHS and sort of reflecting on that. But in terms of people that couldn't really take on the Stay Home mandate in that way, are not necessarily represented in this collection. I will also point to those that weren't able to necessarily document their experiences through this particular form. You know, like, again, the method in this collection was sharing an online questionnaire, and then people that could use the form, people that had access, for example, to a laptop, had access to, had the space to document their experience here. But, not everyone, I think, is able to do that or has had the chance to do that. So these are some sort of gaps within the sort of maybe collecting methodology. Now, in terms of the range, in terms of people across different backgrounds and differences, I think that when it comes to the museum and who we're trying to sort of be in relationship with, means that we've had to sort of do more outreach work when it comes to, for example, people of African and Caribbean descent participating more, or people that are not necessarily, and I say that particular group because in our collections and in our museum and displays, that community wasn't necessarily represented in the narrative of home. So I think a big part of sort of reaching these gaps has been to actually do the outreach work, not only by sharing the fact that this is a resource that's open to everyone, accessible to everyone, but also really going on to sort of, interview some folks, as Annabelle was saying. So having that additional conversation, but also maintaining lines of communication with
all contributors that have shared their stories. What else? Another thing I will say about that is that the way we've also kind of, again, been thinking about the gaps have been also keeping track of all the different projects that have been sort of realized as a result of the pandemic. You know, so connecting with different museums that have also initiated their own collecting projects, reaching out to people that have created sort of like structures to document the pandemic. And you know, a lot of that, for example, has happened online. And it's not only museum workers, it's also creative practitioners. It's, you know, it's different people interested in actually understanding the impact of the pandemic, not only on the home, but on different areas of life, whether we look at education, health, community building, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there are gaps, but we don't come with the assumption that this collection documents absolutely everything. I think right now what we're interested in is how we can be in conversation around this collection with other people interested in how the pandemic, or rather how home has changed as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you, Véronique. Yeah, that's brilliant. And just to sort of build on that, really, that I think it's been really vital that we have worked with community researchers on the Stay Home Stories project, because some of them, they kind of realized that the people that they most wanted to hear from wouldn't necessarily be accessible sort of online, and they've done like telephone interviews in a few cases, and yeah, kind of made it possible for people to take part who wouldn't always be included in this kind of research or these kinds of projects. So that's been really important. And in some cases, we've involved organisations that support particularly people from migrant backgrounds and diaspora backgrounds, and hearing their experiences of vulnerability and kind of, yeah, real hardship that some people have gone through the pandemic with things like housing and immigration status as well has been really important. So maybe reaching some of those topics that are, yeah, really important to find out about, but maybe people wouldn't have shared in quite the same format as this. So that's been really important as well. So I think because of time, I'll move on to the next section, which is where we're going to talk about documentation and cataloguing and the kind of long-term future and yeah, kind of outcomes of this project. So just to kind of touch on this, Véronique, could you say a bit about how the museum has approached cataloguing and documenting the collection to start with? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So as I was mentioning in the beginning, a big part of my role is finding ways to create different relationships to the collections. And one of the ways that's happening is actually by rethinking our documentation and information keeping practices. So it's very much linked to sort of how we hold information about the objects and books we have at the museum. It's very much about who has access to them, whether these systems, these databases that have all the information are, you know, easily accessible. And so when it comes to the Stay Home collection, a big part of this question of documentation has been thinking about how, you know, how do we activate the stories? How do we make sure that like they are, you know, they all come together in ways that like honor the sort of the range of perspectives. So it's, you know, there's not just one experience. You know, we're talking about several people's experience brought into this like collection. And I think when it comes to actually figuring out what this Stay Home collection looks like, so what an accessible, breathable resource looks like, it's about kind of like thinking about it's been about taking the time to talk about what documentation is and what it means. So how we've done that so far is through, on one hand, having volunteers. So volunteers at the museum help with the sort of cataloging bits of things. So what I mean by cataloging is ensuring that the stories are put onto a database, which would enable them to be accessible to the public. So making those stories publicly accessible means that they have to sort of be organized in that way. So we've been working with volunteers for the last couple months, thinking about what that looks like. It's meant also, again, being in conversation, as mentioned before, being in conversation with different sort of collecting projects, different sort of like collecting methodologies when it comes to the pandemic. So that has also informed how we do that at the Museum of the Home. And, you know, in many ways, it's been about also thinking about this sort of process, right? Because, you know, I mentioned earlier, it's about 500 stories, and it takes time. It takes time. So I think when it comes to my engagement, for example, my coordination of volunteers, what's happened is like we're deciding to think about things thematically. So people that are interested in exploring, for example, gendered roles in the household, will focus on those stories and sort of pick up on how their experience informs the practice of making these stories, like putting these stories on this on the sort of collections database. So yeah, I think in terms of documentation and information keeping at the museum, these are all things that we're doing for the long term. And so when in terms of the accessibility of the Stay Home collection, it's something that we're working on like progressively, and hoping that like anyone that's interested can sort of inform that process too. So that's what I'll say in terms of documentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Veronique. And yeah, just to add to that, really, that within the Stay Home Stories project, we've been coding particularly the interviews that we've done with people in London and Liverpool. And for that, we've been using in vivo, so kind of qualitative analysis software. But I think it's also really important that that connects with the wider processes of documentation that are going on at the museum, because quite a lot of that collection of interviews will, if people agreed, be deposited at the museum as well. So I think to have those processes running in parallel and kind of talking to each other about the approaches that we're taking is really important as well for the future of the whole collection. And yeah, just finally, we wanted to talk about some of the...
I don't know if...
Oh, sorry, Veronique. Sorry.
No, go on. Apologies for interrupting you.
That's okay. I was just going to say, like, just for the final section, we'll talk a bit about the Our Home, Our Stories project and installation, and the kind of longer term future of the collection, and work with our artist in residence, Ala Al-Saraji.
Yes. I don't know if, are we able to, so these are links, yeah. I don't know if we're able to watch maybe one, I don't know how we're doing on time, but if we're to share the presentation later, you guys can view them on your own. But those two links attached not only introduce the artist, Ala, but also the process of her making the installation. And so, yeah, if you have the opportunity to watch them, please do. But yeah, so Our Home, Our Stories is a display and space that show how people's experiences of home have shifted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how these experiences can be used to imagine a healthier, more equitable understanding of home in the future. So what happened in the context of this project is that an artist was commissioned to engage with to research the stories and to sort of build an installation, an artwork that would reflect on people's experiences, but also reflect on how we imagine, again, a healthier, more caring and equitable sort of home for the future. And so what you see on the screen now are some of the artworks. So Ala sort of made these beautiful rugs based on her research and based on sort of the stories she encountered. What's not shown here is sort of the audio that's actually attached to each rug has an audio sort of speaking on the process of making the rug, but also what inspired Ala to to illustrate these particular rugs in the way they are illustrated. And so yes, what's been good about working with Ala is really thinking about how different people, different expertise, different knowledge systems can really feed and activate the Stay Home collection. So big parts of the Stay Home collection is about creating different relationships to museum collections, but also encouraging different people to activate the stories, whether that be artists, creative practitioners, cultural workers, researchers, historians, anyone that's passionate about exploring the theme of home, really. So yeah, again, these rugs are meant are informed, definitely informed by the Stay Home collection. And so at the moment where we're at, because the display is no longer up, it came down in January of this year, and it was up for a couple months. So what we're thinking about doing at the museum right now is acquiring these different sort of pieces to sort of, again, be part of the Stay Home collection. So the Stay Home collection wouldn't only be digital born objects, it would also incorporate these sort of physical objects into the collection, because they're very much linked, inextricably linked. And what's been interesting about the process of acquisition is that it's fully informed by the artist's requirements and terms, one of them being that these rugs would be mobile resources, so enabling different groups, organizations, grassroots organizations to access these and to also display them in their own space, not only at the museum, enabling for these rugs also to be accessible online. So, you know, as I mentioned, there's audio files attached to them, so the artist being not only allowed, but also being entitled to share them on her platform, and enabling, full-on accessibility to Stay Home, not only through the museum, but through herself as well, the artist. So yeah, that's where we're at as well, is again, really building this process of creating different relationships to the collections through the different people interested in exploring home and commissioned to do so, actually. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and it informs the documentation process as well. So all these things are very much linked to Stay Home and how we are engaging with it as the pandemic has impacted us. So that's all I'll say for that bit.
Thanks so much, Véronique. And yeah, just to kind of come towards a conclusion, from my perspective as someone who's researched home and people's experiences of home for several years now, I think this project has been really important in kind of working with all the different practitioners and collaborators that we've been working with throughout, really, including Ala and everyone at the museum and the volunteers and participants themselves who've kind of got involved in lots of different ways. And I think it's very clear how the pandemic has kind of been reshaping what people think of in terms of home and meanings of home. And yeah, really interesting to think about the long-term future of that and how we can best make the whole collection as open and accessible to everybody as possible as well. So yeah, was there anything else you wanted to say, Véronique, to conclude, or we can?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would encourage people to if they'd like and if they can, to share their stories. You know, arguably the pandemic, well, the lockdowns are done, but the pandemic continues to impact us in varied ways. So I think it's important to sort of pick up on that and document that, if not through the Museum of the Home and other spaces. So yeah, what I'd say is I encourage people, if they'd like to share their stories, because it's part of an incredible resource. It would be part of an incredible resource that we have here, and in conversation with other stories as well, other people's experiences. So yeah, that's kind of how I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Véronique. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was really fascinating. Yeah, so I think if we want to pass on to the next speakers, so Helen
Husna and Lola. And I think if you stop sharing, Annabelle, if that's possible. Great.
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, I can see them.
Yeah.
Okay, should I go ahead?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, hello. In the second part of this session, we're also going to be talking about curating home, this time in relationship to an exhibition of contemporary art. But first of all, some introductions. I'm Helen Potkin and I'm Associate Professor of Art History at Kingston University, where I lead the BA in Fine Art and Art History and Critical and Historical Studies for Fine Art. So maybe Husna or Lola, you could come in next and introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. Hi, my name is Husna. I'm an artist and curator. I graduated in 2021 in a BA in Fine Art and Art History. And in my practice, I kind of explored my identity of being a South Asian woman and kind of the difficulties and intersectionality of being a second/third generation immigrant.
Hi, my name is Lola Mao. I am a graduate of the Kingston BA Fine Art course in 2021. I'm an artist and I have like a multidisciplinary practice where I look at video and painting work, and I like similar to Husna, I explore around my identity in my work as well as sort of just like looking at moments in time and sort of like trying to like capture stuff. Sorry.
That's perfect. I'm delighted that you're here to talk today. Just to begin with, a brief introduction. So in June 2021, I was contacted by One Paved Court, a gallery in Richmond with whom I've worked with in the past and where several Kingston students have had internships. I think Kate Proudman from One Paved Court is here today, which is absolutely fabulous. They said that they'd decided to hold an exhibition, a student exhibition in January 22. And the idea behind this was that, you know, the students of that year hadn't had a physical degree show because of COVID. So they wanted to give students the opportunity to show their work and asked me to suggest some students or a small group who'd missed the opportunity to have a degree show due to the lockdowns. So I contacted the students on the course I run, Fine Art and Art History, and Zamina Pun was keen to be involved, and Zamina and Husna, who's here today, worked to put a proposal together and to contact potential contributors. And then, as we'll discuss, this was extended more widely to include fine art graduates. One Paved Court is an artist-run contemporary art gallery in Richmond in London. They show work from internationally recognised to local or emerging contemporary artists. I know the gallery well because I don't live very far away, and it's a small space, lovely space, on a domestic scale, and feels, I think, both historic and contemporary. And I will see in some of the images with exposed brick walls, steep stairs and fireplaces. One of the aspects that was particularly significant was that the gallery was keen to have an inclusive exhibition, and they said that they'd like a diverse and ethnically diverse group because artists from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities were underrepresented in the programme. The theme that we alighted, I use that we, but maybe I will credit the students more, on was the theme of home. And in our conversation today, we'll look at how that theme emerged, the curatorial ideas underpinning it, and how the individual works variously engage with it. And we'll also be addressing the issue of representation as it intersects with ideas of home, place and belonging. So the format of our session is a conversation. I'm going to ask Husna and Lola a series of questions about the show, about its theme, and their approach to presenting and contributing to an exhibition called Home. And in doing so, we want to reflect on home as idea, experience and representation. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your responses to our discussion. So let's start. With the question to both of you about how you came up with the theme of home, you know, why this subject at that moment, and why you took up this opportunity. Husna, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So I can't take credit for the name Home. It was actually my co-curator and co-organizer, Sumi, who came up with the theme of home. But it kind of came out of conversations about the fact that we wanted to have an exhibition full of artists of color, and we wanted a theme that I think reflected our identity and something that they could kind of tailor or kind of their work to, or kind of make work in response to the theme. But we wanted something quite broad and open as well, so it didn't feel so restrictive. So I think that's how the theme of home kind of emerged. And then I think why me and Sumi took up the opportunity was when we heard about it, we were still kind of in university towards the end, and we did not have a physical graduate show. So one of the reasons why we took up the opportunity was to have like a physical a space where we can show our work. And I think just hearing the opportunity that One Pave Court wanted to have an exhibition that was diverse, and I think it was like a no-brainer, to be honest. So we just said yes.
Yeah. And Lola?
Yeah, similar. Like as soon as I was asked, I was like immediately yes. I'm so excited. But also I was very excited about the theme of home. Like I've been working, like at the time that I was asked, I've been making a series of paintings, and they were kind of along that theme anyway. So it was like the most prepared I ever felt for anything, because I was like, I've got 2 paintings that are like perfect for this already made. Like I am so excited to be a part of this. So yeah, similarly. So, and also, yeah, the whole idea also, like, because it was happening in January of the next year, like, you know, when you're graduating, you feel like, oh, like, what am I going to do next? Like, what's the next thing that I have to be excited for? And having something that I was working towards that was going to be in January after graduating was just so exciting as well. It helped me, like, you know, keep me on track and help, like, you know, get excited to make art every day and that kind of thing as well.
So maybe just very briefly, just articulate your role within the exhibition. Lola, you were a participating artist within the show, and how you know, obviously you said you were super excited. How was it in terms of your role working alongside other artists and with Husna?
It was, as a participating artist, it was great for me because I was really excited to see, because also I'd been doing my last year of school remotely, so I was excited to just be able to see everyone else's work, and you know, and that was part of it. But I think for me, like as a participating artist, like Sumi and Husna did a really great job with the organization part. Like they were very clear about like, these are the goals we're meeting, like these are what we're doing next, and these are all the things that on your side we need to have done in order to meet the next important thing for the organization of this. So so that was really helpful, and that was kind of my main role. But also, like as a participating artist with you know, like you're also kind of excited because, you know, some people had already had works made and some people were making works for the show. So sort of seeing it come together over time with everyone with their new work coming in, and like everyone's sort of talking about a different kind of thing, that was really exciting.
Right, and Husna, do you want to say a little bit about your role and experience that you brought to it?
Yeah, so I was an organizer for the exhibition, also curator and participating artist. Yeah, and I think at the time when I had said yes to the exhibition, like I'd said previously, we were at the end of our degree, so I think my outlook on the exhibition and approach towards it was completely different to much closer to the date where I had had professional experience in kind of curating and putting together exhibitions on like a daily basis. So I think there was like a complete shift in the approach and the outcome that I wanted from the exhibition.
Great. So should we turn now to focus on the key ideas underpinning your approach to curating and participating in the exhibition? The idea of home is a complex, multivalent concept, potentially encompassing a whole range of notions: domesticity, dwelling, comfort, the everyday. But it's also a site of tension. You can think about more kind of negative connotations of the home, violence, alienation, exile. And we might also think of it as quite an unstable concept in the context of globalization in relationship to notions of migration, shifting concepts of place, nationality, and unbelonging. So what aspects or ideas of home, maybe these are the social, the emotional, the psychological, or indeed the political, so did you want to particularly explore, and why?
I think the short answer is all of the above. But I think which underpinned it was like exploring home in relation to our identity. I think that was like a definite thing that we wanted to explore. But I think there's this notion or like preconceived, like everyone thinks if you're a artist of color that your practice is about your identity, and that it has to be about your identity. And I think with the theme of home, we wanted also artists to, I think, approach that theme also with things that was talked about in the previous talk about how our relationship to home has changed because of COVID and social distancing. So it became like a site for people to make work. So for example, Zui made her lino prints in her bedroom, whereas if it wasn't for lockdown, she probably would have made it elsewhere. So I think definitely the aspect of our relationship to home being changed, our identity as artists of color. And I think Lola will probably expand on it a bit more, but we were having a conversation, and she said something about us being all immigrants, second or third generation immigrants, are one of our family members at some point had immigrated to this country, and how our, I think, perception of home is completely different to someone who probably is like a white artist.
I don't know if we've lost Husna there, but maybe Lola, if you wanted to come in.
Yeah, so
and then she maybe rejoin us.
So like Chris and I were talking before, and we were just sort of thinking that like kind of like the name of the exhibition was home, but there was kind of like, I think in all of the artists' mind, like a secret, like non-shown title was just sort of like the idea of immigration. Like we were all sort of thinking about it, and like we're also, I think it was a lot of it was just about sort of cultural ties, like wanting to honor like everyone in your family in a weird way, like kind of like you have so many influences on you, and trying to think about where all of that history sits in your contemporary art practice. I think that was a thing that a lot of us were sort of thinking about, like, like how do we want to interpret this? In what ways do we want this to show through in our art? Like how much do we want to go abstract with it? How much do we want to say literally? Because I think we all have a lot to say about these kind of things, and everyone's work is also such, they have like if you look at all of the work is in the presentation throughout the show, you see everyone has a really different way of expressing this sort of idea, and I think they all came through, and I was just like, I love how different every single interpretation of the theme was, and how everyone articulates all of these I am sort of like swirling ideas very differently, and how they all come through.
Yeah, sorry, I've just got I was just going to mention the publication that you did in relationship to, and we'll perhaps talk about the work a bit more, but I just wanted to raise that, you know, the subtitle you had here was Identity, Memory and Heritage, and there were certainly kind of strong themes that emerged through the work. So all the artists in the show were graduating students from last year. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about what we have on the screen. We've got Dua and Christine's work. I don't know if Husna has joined us, so I'm going to ask you, Lola, to say a little bit about their work. I had a lovely chat actually at the private view with Dua and talked about her work, but maybe better that it comes from you.
Yeah, so these works are, you know, I love both of them. Dua's work was kind of about and sort of like embracing your, like, you know, obviously like so it was about sort of like, sorry, I'm trying to get it all together. So in Dua's work, she's looking at like what's it like to have, you know, she has, if you meet Dua, you'll know she has a very like, she's a very self-expressive person. Like she has very like intense personal style, and she also wants to like, you know, collaborate that with her British Muslim heritage and, you know, her family heritage and all these things. So in her work, she does a lot of photography and she makes fabric pieces, and she made these beautiful prints that she did. It's all about kind of like collaborating that all together and expressing that in like in her new way, and like very like finding your own personal voice. And then Christine sort of made hers the title is about being in a town. So it's kind of like, you know, an abstract, so it's like a very expressive piece. Like if you look at it up close, from the pictures, it has, you know, like there's very like delicate beading work in this, you know, it's a very gestural piece, but it also has these really, really delicate elements, and then, no, they're really lovely. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, we can now.
Yeah. Oh, great. I don't know how much previously you guys heard, but I think just to add, I think to Dua's, I think when talking to her, modesty was like a key element in her work, and the fact that she wants to trying to express herself, but also trying not to, I think, she wants to be modest but also express herself on in her practice, and I think there's like a tension between that, so that's why she doesn't really show her face in her work.
Yeah. Should we talk about some of the other work on display in the gallery? You mentioned the lino prints, didn't you, earlier?
Yeah. So with Zui's work, she is, I think, definitely exploring her identity as being mixed race, and I think the politics of Black hair and her lived experiences in relation to that. So she addresses that subject matter in both her lino prints and in the video that she made as well. With Sumi, she explores, I think, imagery from Nepal, where she's her family's from, and I think with she's trying to kind of replicate, I guess, like that hustle and bustle, that kind of atmosphere that she like very much knows and is familiar with through like visual cues. And then with Brianna, she's trying to, I think, amplify and highlight Black individuals in portraiture, because you don't really see them that often. And I think also I like highlighting and want to represent just Black British individuals as well in her work and their stories.
Yeah, and it's about a kind of level of visibility, isn't it, through representation. Sorry. And Edward's work, which was shown on the kind of brick wall, the exposed brick wall of the gallery, was also really, really interesting work.
Yeah.
Lola.
I was just saying, yeah, Ed's work was really interesting because like he went through sort of like a nostalgic sort of idea of the home through like food and packaging and like those like visual branding signifiers that you know of, and it like brings you back to your childhood. And so I thought that was like, you know, it was really cool. The prints were lovely. And I think it also goes with a longer, it's like not part of the same project, but he has a similar project that goes back to childhood. So I think it was kind of like, he also made works exhibitions, was kind of like an offshoot of that work to make a new piece.
Yeah, and I think the theme of memory comes out in many of the works. Amrit's work here, it's kind of interesting about the range of media that you showed in the gallery, and worked with, you know, different kinds of you know, print media, paintings, video, for example. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this work and its engagement with the theme?
Yeah, so Amrit is in this piece, Reclaiming, she's kind of exploring high identity as being British, South Asian or British Indian. And I think this kind of her tension of not really belonging here, but not really belonging there, and kind of reclamation of the land. And I think there was like some really beautiful like moments in the piece where she's getting microaggressions of or like racist commentary, and I think her response to that, I think her work is very subtle, and she usually uses a film and spoken word to address this subject matter.
And similarly, Zoe's work uses moving image as well, projected here into space, small space within the context of the gallery.
Mm-hmm.
But we should do your work, shouldn't we? We should talk a little bit about the work that you produced for the exhibition, and the ways in which you engaged with the themes of memory and identity, but very specific. Oh, sorry, I've clicked that on ahead. Husna, for example, in relationship to your own family is a key aspect here, isn't it?
Definitely, I think with these prints, as well as the book I made and the video, it's kind of addressing my grandfather's death about 4-5 years ago, and the fact that when he was my last kind of connection to colonial South Asia and pre-partition. So when he passed, this tie was severed, and I think also exploring kind of the retelling of history through my perspective. So in these kind of prints and in the book that I've made, it's just sort of hiding certain excerpts or like certain parts, passages of the book that was published in 1931 to kind of, I think, take ownership and become like the author of the book. And in doing so, I'm kind of bookending my grandfather's life, because the book was published around the time he was born, and then I have etchings, so imagery of him passing. So it's, I'm not great about talking about my own work, but I think there's something beautiful that happens there on those pages when you do see them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was this kind of level of reworking with given material that has historical resonance, but also individual and subjective, I think is really, really interesting. Lola, do you want to say something about your work? It has a really vibrant quality to it.
Yeah, so these are my two paintings. They're Auntie Gracie 1 and 2. They are based off of the same still life, and they're just two different, like made simultaneously reworking. So like I have one where I like, so like the one that's on the right is, you know, I painted it with like as little as I could, sort of suggest it. And then the one on the left, I kind of went, you know, I'm like, I want to like be really expressive on this one. So that's kind of just like the method of painting, but they're from a larger series of still life paintings that I made from like January until like, September of 2021. And in it, I kind of explored, like, I was looking at food as like a center point for like culture and gathering and like memory and small moments. And so through that like lens, I was organizing, the kind of stuff that like, because like during lockdown, I was with my family. And like during most of the pandemic, I spent it at home with like, my grandma and my whole family. We all got together. So I was doing like a lot of cooking. So I was just like, I'm touching all this produce like every single day. Like this is kind of like a big part of my daily experience. And I thought I would start arranging it, photographing it, and painting it. So that's kind of where it came from. And, through it, I sort of thought about it more. So this is kind of like, it's based off of my like, Caribbean heritage, so it's all sort of like little bits like put together. So, we have the coconut, we have the oranges, we've got the coconut water, the red stripe, the plantains, the, the rum cake, and like the ginger, and sort of kind of, and sorrel, and it's all kind of, put together, but it's not quite like all the way there. It's kind of like, so that's kind of the background of these paintings. And I really wanted to go for like deep, a vibrant, beautiful colors, because that's just like, it was just the right vibe I felt for the painting. So that's kind of what I went off of.
And I remember then, but I'm also thinking now how the artworks worked in the space. And I think it might be really interesting maybe to talk a little bit about the kinds of decision making that you made in terms of presenting the work, in terms of how the work was situated alongside each other. What happened then about, for example, you see your work here in relationship to other work. And, so yeah, I suppose I'm asking about some of the constraints and decision making, but also about what kind of emerged through seeing the work in situ as well.
Yeah, so on installation day, I think Sumi and I had like a rough idea where we were thinking certain pieces would go, but we wouldn't obviously know until actually installing the work. So one of the constraints, or I think difficulties with the show was, for example, when we had contacted the artists, they had said they have a piece, for example, they were going to have an A1 piece, but when it came to the day, it was more like A3. So we had an idea of like, oh, it would work on this big wall, but I think having to readjust how we were going to arrange it. I think the no-brainer was we were going to have the films in the fireplace, because it was just a perfect space just to have them. And I think when we started putting works onto the wall, we realized only certain works worked with in certain parts of the building, because one paved court, it's the building's beautiful, but it's not a white cube space. So you have exposed bricks, you've got these beautiful like pinks and creams coming through, and we noticed that certain works didn't look as good against it, and certain works did. So I think kind of like, yeah, what kind of constantly moving pieces so that we could find the best place for them individually as works, but also for it to work well as an exhibition. And I think really beautiful things kind of came out of it. So, for example, Jua's work against my photography, and the reason why my photography is in the exhibition was realizing we had a lot more space left once we had all the works put up, and we needed to fill some gaps. And I had some of my old work in my folder, so I thought that would be like a good places to put it. And I think there was a really beautiful contrast between our works, because like I said before, Jua is really like modesty is very important to her, and her self-expression is not necessarily by showing her face and being her face being hidden away from the camera, whereas my way of kind of expressing myself and tackling kind of issues like certification and fertilization of South Asian women was to show my face and to confront the camera. So there was really beautiful conversations that were had about our works there, and I think there were elsewhere, but that was the one that kind of stood out the most to me, because I didn't realize it until I was having these tours around on the private view that there was unintentionally something really interesting had happened there.
Yeah, I think also thinking about the nature of the space with its own internal architecture, like fireplaces, with reference to the home as well. These became kind of part of a, if you like, wider conversation about kind of meanings. On this is to both of you, I think, just to wrap up, I think you know, here we have some views of the opening night and seeing the work as you brought out, Husna. Do you think what kind of meanings do you think were generated for the people who came to Richmond to visit the exhibition? Are there particular responses you'd like to comment on? Do you want to assess its success, or do you want to kind of comment on, like, reflecting back from now on the exhibition?
I think reflecting back from now, I mean, the opening night was great. Obviously, with COVID and the building, and the size, we had to keep the guest list, reasonably smaller. But it was great because the space felt full, and it was like people came throughout the night, so it was kind of like staggered, so it was really nice. I think part of it was like, I wasn't part of the hanging process. Like, it makes it easier if most of the artists, go away for a bit while everything goes up, so now not everyone's like, I have my work to be in the front, that kind of helps. So, coming back and seeing the show, but right before it opened, it was really, really, really amazing to see how it all came together and seeing everyone's work in person. Also, it was just great to have an in-person show and be able to talk about your work in front of your work, because like for the past, year before the show, like most of the time we'd shown work, it had been, on a web page. It had been like I have video work and painting work, and I purposely chose to only put painting work in the show because I wanted to physically show my physical work when I can easily show people my video work through different mediums. I think one of my first reactions I got from people was like, I didn't know your work was big, because like I'd only been showing them pictures of it for the whole year. So that was really fun for me. I was like, yeah, I made it big, so that was one of the interesting things. And I think also definitely with the private view, I think it was kind of different from when we were invigilating, people reacted to it, because the people who came to the private view were our guests. So it kind of, the audience was a little bit different than when people were coming in. The reaction was a bit different. People were coming in off of just the street to just come in. I feel like people had sort of different perception of the work versus like people that we'd invited versus people that came in. So I think that was kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, I think with the private view, like Lola said, it was more of our guests. So they were really excited to see our work in a physical space, and we're there to support us. So it was a really lively and lovely atmosphere. And then I think during the invigilation, having members of the public coming in and having just really, really interesting conversations about how their perception of home, what it was before, and then what it made them start thinking about once they started seeing the works, and then also really interested in like even just the materiality of everyone's work, because it's so varied, like you said, Helen. So they were really excited by that. If you click onto the next slide, there's some photos of the last day.
Sorry, I can't manage my computer. There we go.
Yeah, it was the last day, and we just had this big group of like these 2 or 3 families and the daughter was interested in going to art school, and we were giving our experience of being Kingston students, and we did like a massive tour. Everyone talked about their work, and I think it was really nice, especially the dad was hyping us up like, oh my gosh, guys, you've done amazing, like this is absolutely great. And I think when you're in the space for so long with your work, you kind of get used to it, or like so with, I think the last day going through it and just being complimented, everyone was getting complimented. And I think being as a group, because I think the last time we was on installation day and private view, so it was nice to wrap it up all together. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
I think it was a success for me, because I think it was more so about people's responses to it, rather than about sales or how it looked, or how it did well on social media. It was more about how people felt when looking at the exhibition.
Yeah, I really like the way you emphasize the materiality of the show, both of you, and the kind of physical presence of making work, showing work. It was a fantastic exhibition. I really enjoyed it. We're really grateful to One Pave Court for proposing the idea and for working with us. Thank you both to Hosna and Lola for coming to talk today. I'll end the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's really fantastic. I'd just like to say, if anybody's got any questions at the moment, and you can post in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, the raise hand function, then you can always unmute. And I think in a moment we'll be able to start with that. And I also invite Annabelle and Véronique, if you're there, if you want to turn your cameras on. Again, that would be fantastic. Well, maybe I've got one initial thing, just maybe to get things started, which is just, I kind of got a sense from both sets of talks how much home was this felt sense, and it was like very individual, and everything that's kind of coming out of that. In fact, with the pictures, Annabelle and Véronique, like that you had, where people were describing something, and then there would be a photograph of an interior, and it wouldn't necessarily be that you could imaginatively join those up in some way. Like, so it was very much those individuals' felt sense of what home meant for them, the kind of meaning. Completely, what home means is completely, like, in a sense, the topic of like what you're exploring. And I'm almost thinking of the title of our talk about curating home, where you get this sense, it's almost, if you're thinking of, curating your interior, making it beautiful, and that kind of almost magazine interior, which is like completely the opposite in some way of what you guys are exploring, which is very much like a feeling. I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to kind of respond to that in any way. That kind of chimes. Maybe Annabelle or Véronique. Yeah.
I can. Thank you so much. That's a really amazing question, because it's something I've definitely been grappling with, kind of doing this research and talking to people about what home means to them. And I think sometimes there can be perhaps a bit of a tension in how people present their home and what they choose to share and how they feel about it. And that's particularly come through, I think, in some of the maps from children and young people. So we found that several of them were presenting almost quite like an idealized image of their home, but then in some of the interviews and kind of descriptions around the image, they would be talking about how difficult lockdown was, and maybe how they didn't have enough space, or they couldn't go to many of the places that they'd normally go to, but the image was almost quite, like much more positive. And so I think that's something we've been thinking about in the analysis, like how do you reflect on that in those kind of wider engagements with the work. And maybe that's something that the interviews can go into more detail about, is kind of asking people to yeah, reflect on that a little bit more and how emotional the experience was, and that it's not just about like the physical structure of the home or the dwelling place, but it's also, yeah, home as a feeling and how disrupted that has been. But I think, yeah, that's going to be really important going forward in terms of how we're, I don't know, like displaying the collection or how we're choosing to put the quotes alongside the images. And I'm sure, Véronique, you have more that maybe you could, if you wanted to build on that or add to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the objectives of the sort of collecting process was to, again, encourage different people to have agency over how they wanted to share their experiences. And, you know, you have some submissions where people strictly share like an image and then a description of that image. You have people that actively respond to the prompts. You have people that actively respond to the prompts by sharing a video message, an audio recording. And so I think that is a way of sort of really highlighting someone's personhood, right? Like it's, you know, because, you know, as we can see, people have different relationships, not only to home, but to the experience of home. And one thing that we did not want to feed into, which was, you know, based on sort of like the overarching rhetoric of the pandemic, at least in its beginnings, is that, you know, we're all in this together, we're all experiencing the same thing. And that was just never the reality, even before the pandemic. So again, when it came to the museum collecting a range of stories, it also came down to enabling people to share what they thought was important and meaningful, and the experiences they wanted us, people working in the museum, to pick up on, you know, because, you know, some people picked up on, you know, the clap for carers, other people didn't do that, other picked up on, you know, yeah, events that were kind of collective in many ways, but other people just didn't do that, and that was also incredibly valid. So yeah, I think that's how, again, we have a sense of people's personal, individual experiences in relation to, you know, a wider collective experience that, you know, affects society, you know, our society and our understand of like what it means to live, you know, in these times, or, you know, and or experience home in times of crisis, I would say. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Don't know if Husna and Lola, you might have anything you want to say, or
I think it's just, I think probably from before, just how it was really interesting to just see how each artist approached the theme, and how everyone's experience with home was completely different and how they wanted to express that. And I think as well, the visitors coming in and how their perception of home was before the exhibition and how they were starting to think about it or discussing the theme of home.
Thank you. Or maybe, or did you want to say something, Lola, or I could go on? There's a couple of questions.
Sorry, yeah, no, I think Husna covered everything. Okay, yeah.
Well, Nicola, you've got your hand raised. I don't know if you want to unmute and, yeah.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed the whole session, and I suppose following on from Véronique, what Veronique's just talked about, the sort of social and political dimension, really, of the project. And, you know, I think this is very relevant to the art exhibition as well. There was a couple of things I wanted to raise quickly. One was, you know, the experience of, I wasn't a key worker, so I was, you know, homed during COVID, and noticed how as soon as there was this need for people to take control of their communities, they did so. and the capacity of people to cooperate and to care for one another and reach out and look around their local area and relate in different ways. And that this is sort of instant, you know, whenever there's a situation where it isn't business as usual. I was thinking of the recent UCU strikes where you're not working, you're doing something different, resistant. The capacity for us as social beings becomes revealed, and I thought that was very interesting. And then it gets shut down again when it's business as usual, and of course the government's very keen that it's now business as usual again, and that has an effect on the way we relate to one another and our identities, in fact, what we feel, our purpose, our significance in the world, and how useful we are. And then I was just thinking also about the exhibition, the beautiful exhibition, and how I always reflect on this as an artist, as a white artist coming from the south of England. I've never lived abroad and so on, that cultural heritage from my cultural heritage is all about pushing down and denying history and denying material, the material basis of our social relationships, with nostalgia, with normalization, and so on. And when there's a group of people of color who come together to make a cultural statement, as you have done, I think, that there's this history is pushing its way out of the box in a way, pushing forward, and becoming more palpable. And you know, I just really appreciate it and find it inspiring, and it helps me as a disabled LGBTQ artist to sort of allow those parts of me that are shut down and denied by society to find, you know, seek expression. And I really appreciate it. And I'm a historical materialist, and that's where I'm coming from. And I think that these are the questions for me as a researcher that historical materialist framework allows me to raise. And yeah, so just thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Nicola. I don't know if anyone has anything how they'd like to respond.
Other than just thank you, that was really nice of you to say that, and I'm glad that seeing the exhibition has made you, I'm not sure of the wording, but like made you realize or not push down those kind of ideas and thoughts and your own identity as well.
It's inspiring. That's the word. It's inspiring.
Yeah.
And heartening. Thank you.
Lola, did you?
I just wanted to follow on and say thank you. That was such a lovely comment.
I think we're almost running out of time, but I just wanted to read in the chat, Mabisi saying, given the multicultural backgrounds of the artists in the exhibition, did you find any similarities or shared experiences within the works that stood out for you as an artist and or curator? So Husna and Lola, have you got any thoughts?
I would say like definitely yes, like even just like I think we all really had things that we found similar. I mean, I find a lot of similarities. Like Husna and I, although we have different cultural backgrounds, we look at very similar things in our artwork separately. Like we follow the same like sort of themes, but we don't do the same stuff. And I feel like there's lots of similarities like that between the artists and the curators in this show. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think same with like themes, and so like me and Lola have similar concepts we're exploring, and there are a lot of other connections with all the other artists as well. But I think there's also similarities with the materials that we use. So for example, me and Ed use screen print, but our approach to screen print is completely different. Like he's looking at nostalgia and I'm more using it as a device to alter and and to basically depict my telling of history. So things like that. And then there's video pieces, and they're completely different as well. So I think, yeah, there is similarities and differences, and it was really nice not to have just like all paintings or all prints or all film. And it showed the differences, who we are as people, as artists, and as people of color.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think so. We kind of run out of time now, so I'll just pass over to Fran to wrap up.
Thank you. Absolutely fascinating, and that sense of the diversity, but also what was the subtitle. I found that really interesting. Identity, memory and heritage. So because maybe in everyday life before COVID and lockdown, if we experienced that in different ways, we might have thought of home as something very different. And so what is very clear in both the presentations, that that having to be in a place brought up so much of time of cultural heritage, time of belonging, unbelonging, going right back, which relates very much to what was just discussed about the way that it just opened connections up in unexpected ways. And I think it was great having these two presentations together, actually, because very different circumstances for them. You know, the gathering of online material followed up with interviews, a sort of physical exhibition, and very different participants, but the way that they both bring those points together about the expansiveness, suddenly you realise, of home, the complexity of it, and idea home representation. Yes. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers. It was just a brilliant session, really thought-provoking and fabulous work to see. This is, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of 3 sessions. Our next one is on Thursday, the 26th of May at 1 p.m. And that connects very strongly, actually, with this. It's about creativity in lockdown, and that's about home crafting, parenting, and that is led a conversation with Lena and with Daisy, who are here, and with their guests. And then the third in the series is Friday the 10th of June, and that is going to be with on 2 artist homes in Kingston. So that's Dora Gordine and Mybridge. That is a early evening session. So we will doubtless pick up on these threads again and take them in different directions. And I would just really like to thank, on behalf of the Centre and the University, all of our speakers, and also Helena for setting this up and being our sturdy grip on getting out into the world. Thank you.